Hello, and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Yeah, that music's a little different than we usually have. That's the Weird Questions music. That means we've got 2 hours of Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. I love that music personally for a couple reasons. Partly, I just love the music. Secondly, I love doing Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. So both hours, we got a whole bunch of great Weird Questions coming up. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy that. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett.
And thank you for being here for more Weird Questions. This is always a fun one.
Yeah.
You've looked ahead. Are they quite weird?
Mm-hmm.
We have some good weirdness.
Most of them.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Weird question. No, I see. This is where I always get Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Once I get one in my head, I mix them up. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World continues to be one of the most popular documentary podcasts on the internets.
Yeah. We're regularly in the top 20 on Apple podcasts in the U.S., and we've got over 100,000 listeners a week, we estimate.
Very nice. Drops each Friday morning. You can get it by going to mysterious.fm, or you can just put in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And I've even tried it by misspelling Akin, and you get to it. It gets you there.
Oh, good.
All right, I won't be giving out the phone because the weird questions are in. They come to us. If you ever want to send us a weird question, you could just send it to radio@catholic.com or get in touch with Jimmy at one of his various ways people get in touch with him. And they'll find their way here. This one, Jimmy, comes from Eli. Since God created time, space, and matter, and is not bound by the three, when we die and are with him, are we no longer bound by the three? And in addition, would it be possible for us to be our own guardian angels? Not to say that we were created as angels before our earthly existence, but to say that we are able to traverse time back to our earthly beginnings and also assist in the guidance of those that we love.
Okay, so when we talk about being with God, since God is not, as Eli says, bound by space or matter or time, God does not have a body, and therefore we are not with God in a spatial sense. It's not like there's a place where God is located and we go to be with him in that place. Instead, we're with God in a spiritual sense that is classically described in theology as having the beatific vision, where we have an intuitive awareness of God's inner nature as the source of all love and creation. And so we're not with him like I would be with you if I was in the studio in San Diego.
Right.
We'd both be in the same place. So we don't leave time, for example, when we go to be quote unquote with God. So how will we be bound or not bound by space, time, and matter when we're in the afterlife? Well, the afterlife has two phases. The first phase is what's known as the intermediate state, and it's the state between death and resurrection. The second phase is resurrection, where we're told in Scripture we'll live on the new earth. But in that disembodied state, well, we may not be bound by space. There is a significant strand in the history of Catholic thought that says spirits can manifest wherever they direct their attention, basically. And so like with an angel, if an angel were performing a miracle in the studio in San Diego, you could say the angel is in the studio. It's not literally spatially there, but that's where it's manifesting. And in a substantial current, not the only current, but in a substantial current of Christian thought, our spirits don't really have locations. They can manifest in different places like an angel can, but if that theory is correct, then they wouldn't be bound by space. On the other hand, there's another theory that says maybe we do have some kind of spiritual body that corresponds to our physical body, and that might be bound by space. We will, in the disembodied state, still be bound by time in some form. It's actually a teaching of the church that all created beings are bound by time. God, as the creator, is not, but all created beings, including humans and angels, are. But they may experience time in different ways. some of the ways they may experience it differently may be due to perception and how their minds work. Like, for example, you may notice that if you want to catch a fly, it's really hard to catch a fly because they are so fast. Whereas if you want to catch a sloth, it's really easy because they're so slow. And biologists have proposed that that different life forms perceive time at different rates. So flies perceive time really fast, and sloths perceive it really slow compared to us, and we're kind of in the middle. Well, theologians have speculated something similar about angels, that angelic cognition may work differently than human cognition in terms of its perception of time. So medieval theologians speculated about a condition that shares some elements of eternity or timelessness and some elements of time, and they called it aveternity to distinguish it from eternity. And in aveternity, you kind of basically, at least my understanding is, you basically don't really perceive the flow of time until something happens. So you're kind of just chilling until you get to a point where something changes. You don't perceive time dragging on. So we might, in the disembodied state, have a sort of aveternal perception. On the other hand, that's just speculation. We might perceive time exactly the way we perceive it now. Or it could be like how time seems to speed up and slow down in our own lives today. You know, you're at a really exciting event, you don't notice the passage of time because you're so focused on what's happening. Like if you're at a really great party or you're watching a really intense sports ball game or something like that, you don't really notice the passage of time. Whereas if what you're doing is completely uninteresting, time just seems to drag by. And so it might work like that. On the other hand, our imaginations are shaped by the one dimension of time that we experience here on Earth, but there could be more than one dimension of time. And so time might work in an even stranger way in the afterlife that we can't presently conceive. In a re-embodied state, we will, so after the resurrection in phase 2 of the afterlife, we may be bound by space, because we'll have our bodies back, and our bodies are spatial in nature. They take up space. But we may not be bound by it the way we are right now. There is a significant strand of speculation in the history of Christian thought that will basically have superpowers in the afterlife. Now, they didn't call them superpowers because that's a recent word that was invented in the 20th century, but that's basically what they are. And one of the superpowers that has been proposed for us to have is known as agility. And agility is basically it's basically teleportation, that you could instantly move between one place in the universe and another. So if we have agility or teleportation, then we wouldn't be bound by space in the way we are now, but there still would be a spatial element to our experience. When it comes to could we be our own guardian angels? Well, if time travel is possible, hypothetically, we could go back in time and perform guarding functions. Or even if time travel is not possible, we could pray to God for ourselves in the past and perform a kind of guarding function for ourselves, because no matter what your theory of time is, whether you believe all of time is real to God all at once, or even if you believe only an individual slice of time that we call the present is real, well, back when you needed help from God knows the future. So he knows you're going to be praying for yourself in the past. And so he can take into account the prayers that you say in the future back in the past when you needed the help. So it's hypothetically possible that we could function as guardians for ourselves, and we could call that function being a guardian angel, even though it's not an angel in the sense of normal angels. It's possible, but I'm not aware of any evidence we have for this being the case.
All right. Thank you very much for that question, Eli. Thanks for getting us started with some very interesting stuff. There's lots more to come. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. We'll be right back with more of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment. Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you ready to spread your wings? Wings is the weekly newsletter that's packed with exclusive news, program information, features, and updates of all that's going on at the Global Catholic Network. To sign up, go to EWTN.com, click subscribe, enter your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. Get your wings today. It's the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. That's a little bit of weird music because it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour and next. Lots of weird questions lined up. And you can always send them to us. If you've got them, send them to radio@catholic.com. This one comes from Deacon Jason, who says, when I was in 5th grade, I hit my head playing with some friends. I lost memories for the previous 48 hours and was officially diagnosed with amnesia. If I had committed a mortal sin during that period and forgot it, therefore never confessing it, what is my moral culpability?
Well, we are still culpable for forgotten sins. So if, let's say you murder somebody, and then in the process of murdering them, they hit you on the head and you lose a memory of the fact that you murdered them. You still chose to murder them. Mm-hmm. And that still sticks on your soul until you repent. And if you genuinely turn back to God in repentance in a way that excludes all mortal sins, then you've just implicitly excluded that mortal sin you forgot about. You no longer will having murdered that person. If you even forgetting the murder, if you say, God, I'm really sorry for everything I've done against you, and I want to be with you, and I exclude mortal sin. I don't want it. I wish I'd never done it. Well, even though you don't remember committing the murder, you've just repented of the murder. You've done it implicitly rather than explicitly. And when you then go to confession, as long as you don't deliberately hold a sin back that you know about, you're going to be sacramentally absolved. So the next time you go to confession, you're willing to reject all mortal sin, and the priest absolves you. And even though you don't remember the murder, you're going to be absolved of the murder. And that's one of the reasons that people often finish their confessions by saying things like, and for all my sins, I'm truly sorry. Because we know that we don't always remember all of the sins we need to confess. And so people commonly put that in just to acknowledge that I may have forgotten something I need to confess, and I'm sorry for that too. And so the principle is you are responsible for sins you committed, whether you remember them or not. But when you repent and go to confession, they can still be forgiven.
Okay, all right, Deacon. I hope that is helpful. I
hope he didn't commit any murders in 5th grade. That's a little young.
I know. But if he did, what a terrible inconvenience to get amnesia right after that. You can just get knocked in the head and lose the past 48 hours, huh?
Yeah, it's possible.
Wow.
Traumatic brain injury is kind of like that.
Yeah, right. But then if you're in a 1960s sitcom, of course, I think we've discussed this before. Do
not hit the person a second time. That will only give them more traumatic brain injury. It is not a cure.
That's the saddest thing about 1960s TV. If you got amnesia, the cure was to whack you in the head again. All right, let's go for a question from Nick. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour. After taking your class in parapsychology, Nick says, I began to wonder, are there any similarities between how parapsychology field researchers investigate claims of apparitions and the ways in which the church investigates Marian apparitions? Also, because we believe Mary was assumed bodily into heaven, does that mean that she is then appearing bodily? Okay, now somebody move my my words. Oh, that she is then appearing bodily? Or could the apparitions, like those of Saint Bernadette or the Fatima children, be, in a manner of speaking, kinds of miraculous OBEs?
Okay, so what Nick is referring to is the fact that I've been asked to teach parapsychology at the Rhine Education Center, which is an outgrowth of the work of the most famous American parapsychologist of the 20th century, a guy named J.B. Rhine. And he founded an institute that still continues, and they teach parapsychology, and they've asked me to. So last fall, I taught an introduction to parapsychology class. Nick was one of the students. It went really well, and they've asked me to keep teaching that class. They've also asked me to teach this August a Christianity and parapsychology class, and this fall a world religions and parapsychology class. So Nick or others might be interested in those. Well, it so happens that regarding Nick's first question, apparitional investigations are similar, that the church does, are similar to paranormal field investigations of apparitions, because apparitions happen in, an apparition is where a departed person appears. That's where the word apparition comes from. It's from appear.
Okay.
So if the Virgin Mary appears to you, or Saint Bernard appears to you, well, you got a big impressive visitor, but it's in principle the same as when the spirit of your deceased wife appears to you, or when the former owner of your house appears to you in your house. Those are all apparitions. And so they get reported in both religious and non-religious contexts. And consequently, they get investigated in both not religious and non-religious contexts. In fact, there are other types of paranormal field investigations that get performed, both by parapsychologists and in the church. In fact, one of the things I'm going to be talking about in my Christianity and parapsychology course is how the church actually does 3 types of paranormal field investigations. One is on apparitions. Another is on miracles, like when people get miraculously healed, and that gets investigated as part of the canonization of saints. And the third is cases of spirit possession, because before you do an exorcism on someone, you always want to verify they really are possessed, that this isn't mental illness or hoax or psychological, misunderstanding or something like that. And so the church actually is in the business of doing paranormal investigations, and they do have similarities, a lot of similarities with how the church does it. In parapsychology and in the church, one of the first things that happens when you're doing a field investigation is you look at possible natural causes like fraud, mental illness, or misunderstanding of natural phenomena. Like, for example, in the case of investigating a medical miracle, could the disease have just gone into spontaneous remission? Is that a known phenomenon that happens with this disease? And so what happens both in the church and in parapsychology is you make a list of the possible explanations for the phenomena that's been reported or observed, and then you go down that list starting with the natural ones, because natural explanations for events are more commonly correct than paranormal ones. And you look at the natural ones first and say, do these provide a good explanation for the facts in this case? If they do, well, you're kind of done. If you find out, there's evidence of hoax here, well, then it's a hoax. Or you find out, this person's mentally ill and hallucinating, well, then that's the explanation. But if you can eliminate the natural ones, then that gives you reason to believe that something paranormal is happening, which may in fact be something supernatural. So, for example, in the case of investigating a medical miracle, phase one is they bring in doctors who are medical experts, and they ask them about all the possible natural explanations for what happened with this person. And if the doctors conclude that there is no natural medical explanation for the event, then they turn it over to a team of theologians to look at it, to say, okay, let's look at this from a spiritual perspective now. Is there evidence that would indicate it was supernatural in origin? So there are a lot of similarities in the processes. In terms of Nick's second question, would Mary's appearances like to the children at Fatima be OBEs? An out-of-body experience, or an OBE is what's known as an out-of-body experience. And basically what happens is, in an OBE, your perspective shifts away from our body. Normally, we perceive the world from within our bodies. It's like I'm turning my head, I'm perceiving things from the perspective of my head and my eyes and my body more generally. But sometimes people's point of view shifts away from their body, and they may even look back and see their body. This is commonly reported, for example, in near-death experiences where someone goes into cardiac arrest and their perspective shifts so that they're now like hovering up by the ceiling and looking down on their body, and they see the doctors and the nurses working on them to try to restart their heart. And OBEs can happen in a variety of different ways. There are even techniques to deliberately induce them. There are people who've practiced how to do this. Would Mary's experiences be considered OBEs since she has a body with her in heaven? Well, it would depend on whether her perspective shifts away from her body or not. If she is still perceiving the world or the universe from within her body, then it wouldn't really be an out-of-body experience, even though she's talking to the kids in Fatima. You can imagine how that might happen. For example, sometimes you'll watch science fiction, and it could be Star Wars, it could be Star Trek, but you'll see two people having a conversation by holograms.
Oh, yeah, right.
So one of them is standing in one place and talking to someone else, and then you see the hologram talking to that person. The apparitions could work like that. It could be Mary's up in heaven. She's perceiving the universe from the perspective within her own body, but she's being represented to the children at Fatima in a vision. So it's not necessary that her consciousness shift to a different perspective than her body. Mm-hmm. It could just be she's having the mystical equivalent of a conversation through holograms. She's being represented by a vision to the children, or she's being represented telepathically to the children, even though her own perspective is still within her body. On the other hand, it's possible that that she could be having an out-of-body experience, that her perspective shifted down to Fatima, Portugal, to talk to the kids. And because we're likely to have vastly greater abilities in the afterlife than we do now, especially if you're the Virgin Mary, she could be multitasking. She could have her perspective in her body and have multiple other perspectives she's moderating at the same time. So it might be a sort of partial out-of-body experience for her. Another phenomenon that's related to this is, for the kids, of course, it's just an apparition. They're not out of their bodies. But it's possible the Virgin Mary is having an OBE. And another phenomenon that this could be linked to is what's known as bilocation. Bilocation is where a person appears in more than one place at a time. And this is studied both in parapsychology and in religion, like with Padre Pio, who was famous for appearing both in Rome and in his monastery at the same time. Mm-hmm. And when that would happen, he would kind of like go quiet in his monastery, and people would perceive him as if he was in Rome. So it's like kind of a telepathic projection or vision of him that's happening in Rome. He's not physically there, but he appears to be there to people. And that could also be what's happening with things like the Virgin Mary appearing to the Fatima children. It could be a form of bilocation.
Fascinating. Oh, so that bilocation, people sometimes think that his physical body is in two places.
And most theologians say that's not accurate. Now, I think there are some ways you could maybe make that happen relying on quantum mechanical properties of matter, but historically they didn't know about quantum mechanics, and so theologians like Aquinas would say his body's not really moving. It's some kind of appearance, and it might even be a tactile appearance where you could touch him, but they say, nah, his body is really in his monastery.
Nick, thank you for all the interesting questions. Appreciate that. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour, and I've got a whole bunch more to come. And while we're heading into the break right now, I'll invite you to take a look at CatholicAnswersConference.com. Find out about our big September conference coming up. And it's all about Jesus. It's all about the parables and sayings of Jesus. Lots of wonderful speakers there. Among them, Jimmy Akin, our guest today. We hope to see you there. Check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com. Right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Is relativism dead? It sure seems dead. Each day, new moral demands are made, and they are presented to us as absolutes. Everything, from transgender ideology to physician-assisted suicide, is presented as a moral good that all right-thinking people must accept. But Catholic Answers' own Carlo Broussard says look deeper, and you will see today's moralism is just relativism dressed up in new clothes. Carlo's eye-opening book, The New Relativism, shines a light on how the sacred moral teachings of this age cover up a deep denial of moral truth. Order your copy of The New Relativism today at shop.catholic.com and be prepared to defend the truth against aggressive relativism. The New Relativism at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's a Weird Questions episode, something we started a few years ago, and it has been very popular, and you can see why. It's fun getting these bit offbeat questions for Jimmy, and this one comes from a familiar name. Jimmy, Simca Fisher asked you a question.
Well-known blogger.
And said, and I have to say, I really like the question. What are the spiritual ramifications of fungus?
Well, in terms of spiritual ramifications, you could take that one of two ways. You could take that in terms of what effect does fungus have on human beings, and thus how might it impact them spiritually. Or you could take it in terms of what does it reveal spiritually? What spiritual lessons does fungus have to teach us? And a lot of people today might be kind of dismissive of this question. They don't think about fungus a lot, and they might say, well, it really doesn't have any spiritual lessons to teach us. One might even, some people, I don't know about Simca, but some people might even be inclined to ask this question as a joke. But that doesn't mean it doesn't get a serious answer or one that has spiritual content, because the truth is all creatures reflect aspects of their creator. Everything that God made in the world displays his glory and says something about him. And in the history of Christianity, Christians were very interested in this question, going all the way back to the early centuries. Like there was a second, third century document known as the Physiologus, which was kind of like a nature handbook that looked at things like animals and plants and allegorized them and said, here are the lessons we can learn from this animal. You know, you think about, for example, a lion. Well, the lion is used in the Bible as a symbol of God, you know. So what can we learn about lions that would tell us something about God? Well, they're strong, they're noble, they're, you know, they have a variety of different attributes, principally strength and nobility, that one could compare to God. And if you think about other animals and plants, you can find similar things. And so there are lots and lots of works down through the history of Christianity. And this didn't really change until the 1600s or 1700s with the scientific revolution. But if you read old bestiaries, which are like books about animals, or old books about plants, you know, herbs and stuff, they will draw spiritual lessons from them, from what they're talking about. They'll say, like, this plant, for example, that grows along paths is a symbol to remind us of the pilgrimage and journey we have in this life. And so you will get spiritual, you know, allegorizations of created beings. And that's going to include fungus. Because, you know, like mushrooms, now they didn't have the distinction that we do between plants and fungus. You know, that wasn't on their conceptual map. And so if you look in like a book about herbs or plants, you're going to find discussions of mushrooms, and they're a kind of fungus. So I did that. I looked up in Hildegard of Bingen. She's a doctor of the church.
Okay.
She wrote a book called Physica, in which she looks at different plants and animals, and she's looking at them primarily from a medical perspective, which gets us more to the what effect can they have on humans side of the question. She's got a big discussion of mushrooms, because there's bunches of different types of mushrooms. And she doesn't really go for the God angle so much, but she does go for the human angle. And for example, in her treatment of mushrooms, this is Physica 172, she says the mushroom that grows on an almond tree, so specific type of mushroom, it grows on an almond tree, is not rightly hot or cold. And heat and temperature were a big deal in her medical system. She'd talk about this kind of substance is more hot, this kind of substance is more cold, and this is how you use it to treat stuff. So she says it's not rightly hot or cold, but has a torpor in it. It is not valuable for eating because it stirs up, but if worms are nascent on a person, so like they've got a parasitical infection of worms, before they are alive, so before they hatch, take the mushroom which grows on the almond tree when it is fresh and recently taken from the tree. Hold it over boiling water so that it becomes warm and moist. Place it frequently, warm and moist, over the swelling where the worms are developing, and the swelling will vanish. If the worms have grown so that they are alive, dry the same mushroom in an oven which is warm but without coals. Reduce it to a powder and frequently place it over the sore, and the worms will die. So here's a way, according to St. Hildegard of Bingen, doctor of the church, that based on the medical science of her day, you could use fungus, in this case, a mushroom that grows on an almond tree, to treat parasitical infections, and thus it could have a benefit to humans, and that has spiritual ramifications. But if you want to have the more allegorized version of here's what these mushrooms can teach us about God, you'd need to check other medieval works of this nature, because Hildegard is more focused on the medical aspects, and she doesn't go into the more allegorical aspects in Physica.
All right. Thank you, Simca, for that excellent question. I wonder how much maybe you know this, I don't know, Jimmy, but these remedies, for example, that's a very specific remedy. It must have been tried. Do people go back and read these books and say, well, what's the chemical properties we might get?
Yeah. So it's essentially a form of folk medicine because it's before the scientific revolution. And people do go back and look at folk remedies and say, maybe there's something here that we can learn from.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the remedies don't really work. Like one of the things that Hildegard talks about in Physica is she talks a lot about jewels and stones and how you can use them to treat illnesses. And she thinks, for example, that you can use emeralds to treat epilepsy.
Oh.
Well, that's not really supported by, like, you put an emerald under your tongue and your seizure is going to get better.
Oh.
And so she, a lot of her ideas were reasonable for the time, but they haven't been borne out by subsequent research. But modern medical researchers do look at older folk remedies and with an eye towards maybe there's something we can learn here. Maybe some of these worked. For example, that's how we got aspirin. Aspirin is acetylsalicylic acid is basically, it's a near chemical clone of salicylic acid, which is found in willow bark. And willow bark historically was used to treat headaches and fevers. And so we then came up with this kind of synthetic willow bark substance based on folk medicine that now know and use as aspirin.
Oh, very cool. Simca, thank you again for the question. This one comes from Stephen. It's weird questions today with Jimmy Akin, and this one comes from Stephen. Suppose we were all in the Matrix, and all our history is the result of a computer programmer's choice. The arguments for the existence of God may still work.
Yeah, they would, because you still need who built the computer programmer, so there's got to be a God. Yeah.
Okay, but would this undercut the plausibility of the Christian faith, since its veracity is based on certain historical events actually having happened?
So we need here to distinguish between two different understandings of what might be meant by being in the Matrix. If you watch the first Matrix movie, people are alive and they're kept alive in tanks. And then the world they experience is a computer simulation that's fed into their brains. So that's what actually happens in the movie The Matrix. But when you have a lot of people discussing this question, what they're really asking about is what's known as the simulation hypothesis, where everything in the universe is part of a computer simulation. And so our bodies are part of that simulation. It's not like there's a tank somewhere that has the body of Psychedelic floating in it. Psychedelic and his body would be part of the simulation.
Okay.
And since that's what most people are asking about when they pose this kind of question, that's what I'll assume for purposes of this answer. And the answer is it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily pose a challenge to the Christian faith, because all we're really altering here is the substrate that the universe is made of. For ages and ages and ages, people didn't know what the universe was made of. You had all these speculations by the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, for example, about what is the fundamental stuff that the universe is made of. One theory was, well, it's all actually fire, just taking different forms, or it's all actually water taking different forms, because you can see how water can be solid, liquid, or gas. And so maybe everything is water just taking different forms, or maybe it's flux, taking different forms. And one of the theories that eventually developed was the four classical elements: air, earth, fire, water, and sometimes ether. And so for a long, long time, people really didn't know what the universe is made out of. The modern atomic theory, which is actually not the same as the classical atomic theory, wasn't really proved till 1905. Albert Einstein gave us that. Prior to 1905, so like in the late 1800s, a lot of people, atoms kind of make the math work, but maybe they're just a mathematical trick, and it's not really atoms. It was Einstein who proved atoms. So that's our current understanding. But the Christian faith doesn't require atoms. It doesn't require the particles atoms are made of. It doesn't require protons and electrons or quarks or anything like that. And so consequently, the Christian faith could be true if, instead of being made of atoms, the world was made of data patterns. And so God the Son could take on human form in the matrix and redeem us in the matrix. It's just that his body would be made out of data patterns instead of matter. And that's okay, because we historically have not known what the universe is made of, and the Christian faith does not depend on knowing what the universe is made of. So as long as we have souls that are attached to our data pattern, to our bodies, it doesn't matter whether they're made of data patterns or subatomic particles or the four classical elements or anything else. The Christian faith doesn't care what the universe is made of. What it cares about is that God made it, and that we're in it, we have souls, and that God the Son became incarnate in it and redeemed us. So consequently, even if it turned out that we are in a simulated universe and there's some other universe running the simulation, we're in computers that are part of another universe, it wouldn't necessarily disprove the Christian faith. It might or might not be consistent with the Christian faith, but it wouldn't automatically disprove it. And so if you'd like more information about this, go all the way back to the beginning of Mysterious World and listen to episode 17, where I talk about this. You can get to it by going to mysterious.fm/17.
Stephen, thank you for that question. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, and we'll take a quick break and be right back to that after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Want the latest pro-life news? Want it delivered? Sign up. It's free. EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your source for everything happening now in the fight to protect the sanctity of human life. New episodes delivered every week to your inbox. So if you really want to know,
Sign up today.
Go to EWTN.com/pro-life today.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I really like the questions today. We got a lot of really good, weird questions today. So if you've got a weird question, if one occurs to you, you send it to us at radio@catholic.com. And every now and then we get to do these shows with Jimmy with the weird music and the weird questions. And here's another one. This one's from Timothy. St. Guinefort was the dog saint who, according to legend, saved a baby but was falsely accused of trying to attack it and was subsequently killed. Mm-hmm. His small cult was quashed by the church. But if we are to believe in an animal afterlife, does that mean that animals could technically become saints? And could we pray to them?
Okay, so first we should explain who St. Guinefort was. St. Guinefort was a Greyhound, so a specific breed of dog, in France in the 1200s. At least this is the story. And St. Guinefort's owner had a baby son, and one day the owner was out of the house doing stuff. And when he comes back to the house, Guinefort, like a good dog, rushes up to him to greet him, but he notices that Guinefort has blood on his mouth. His mouth is bloody. And he goes in to the nursery and sees like the cot that hit the bassinet or whatever that the baby was in is like overturned. There's no sign of the baby. There's blood all over the place. And he thinks Guinefort has killed and probably eaten my son. And so he is enraged and he takes his sword, this is being the 1200s, and kills Guinefort. But then he hears his son cry out, and he lifts up the baby bed, and his son is under the baby bed with the corpse of a snake that has been repeatedly bitten to death. And so he realizes what happened is that the snake attacked his son, and Guinefort defended his son and bit the snake to death, and that's where all the blood came from. And so he then regrets having killed Guinefort, and they take Guinefort and bury him in a well in some versions of the story, and it becomes a kind of shrine. And actually, now Timothy said his small cult, meaning group of people who were devoted to him as a saint, I don't know how small it was, because pilgrimages to St. Guinefort's burial site were still being done as late as 1940.
Holy smokes.
So that's like a 700-year run. And people would go to St. Guinefort's site since he had protected this child. And since he had been killed innocently, Guinefort was kind of regarded as a martyr dog. And since he had protected this child, people would go to him and pray for children. Like if you have a sick child, you might go to St. Guinefort's shrine and ask St. Guinefort to intercede for the cure of your child. And that happened as late as the 1940s. So even though this was not an approved, sainthood, it was a 700-year-long cult, and it may still exist. And cult is not being used in the bad sense here. It just means a group that has a particular devotion. So so that's who St. Guinefort is. By the way, there are other similar tales. Now, even though we do have fairly early records about St. Guinefort that do date from the 1200s, I have a little question about the historicity of this, because we also have similar stories from other areas besides France. Like in Wales, there was a similar dog named Gellert, and the same exact thing happened. The dog greets the master sees the dog is bloody, assumes it's killed his son, and he kills Gellert. So I'm not sure what the actual historical basis of any of these is, but those are the stories. Now, if animals have an afterlife, and that is not the common opinion has always been that animals don't have an afterlife, but that's not church teaching. That's it's a theological opinion. And in studying the matter, I did an episode of Mysterious World on this. It turns out that when you look at the arguments for animals not having an afterlife, they're philosophical in nature. Like when you look at Thomas Aquinas' discussion of this, he's making philosophical arguments, not even biblical arguments, but just philosophical arguments. And I concluded that his arguments aren't very persuasive. And since it's not church teaching, it's just a matter of opinion, I think we need to be more open on this. And in fact, there's some evidence, which you can go to the Animal Afterlife episode of Mysterious World if you want more information about. There's actually some evidence that at least some animals may have an afterlife. So let's assume that's true for purposes of answering Tim's question. I'm not saying it's true, but let's assume it's true for purposes of discussion. If animals have an afterlife, does that mean they can be saints? Well, maybe, but maybe not. One of the things that Catholic thought has historically distinguished between is the state of heaven that we will receive, which involves full spiritual union with God, where we have the beatific vision and so forth, and other states that could happen to us in the afterlife. And the persistent opinion is that heaven is a gift. It is something we do not deserve. And so God didn't have to give us the option of heaven. He chose to do that, but he didn't have to choose to do that. He could have given us an afterlife where we're in a state of pure nature, where we are happy and we continue to exist for the rest of eternity, and we're happy and it's all great. We just don't have that spiritual union with God. So you could propose, well, maybe that's what happens with good dogs. Maybe they go to a realm of the afterlife where they're happy for eternity, but since they didn't really have a conscious awareness of God in this life, they might not have a conscious awareness of God in the afterlife. And so they might have a perfectly happy afterlife that just doesn't include the beatific vision. So they wouldn't be saints in that sense of having the kind of communion with God that human saints and angelic saints have. On the other hand, God could give them the same gift he gave us. He could elevate their intellects to the point that they can perceive him and understand him, just like he's going to elevate our intellects in the afterlife. And if that's the case, then dogs could be holy and in union in a way that that they have a conscious awareness of God and the ability to communicate on a greater level than they do. And we're out in fringe territory now, but if that were the case, you could pray to them in principle, because we can make requests of dogs now. You know, if I'm with my sister's dog and I say, "Come, Luna," well, that's a request and an instruction, and she knows what to do. She knows to come over to me. So we can make requests of dogs now, and sometimes they are requests because sometimes the dog doesn't want to do it. But if that's the case, and if dogs are with God in the afterlife and able to communicate, having elevated intellects, then you could make requests of them there, in principle. But here comes the other side of the equation. The church doesn't have good evidence for dogs or other animals being in heaven, and therefore it doesn't canonize them. And we're not allowed to offer public prayer, meaning like prayer in a church under church auspices, like when you're saying a litany of the saints or something. Churches are not allowed to offer public prayer to saints that have not been canonized. You need to either be beatified or canonized and listed in what's known as the Roman Martyrology if public devotion and prayer is going to be shown to someone in a church. However, privately you can pray to anyone you want. So I couldn't rule it out. Let's say you had a really good dog who has gone on to be with God. If you wanted to say, hey, Rover, if you're up there, could you ask God to bless me? Well, what I can tell you is church law wouldn't prohibit that, but it's not a common practice.
All right. Well, thank you, Timothy, for the question.
At least if it is a common practice, people don't talk about it.
Man, that Guinefort story, though, that's a tearjerker. Guinefort?
Mm-hmm.
It's just terrible. That's like the worst O. Henry story ever.
I know. Always check out the circumstances before you kill your dog.
I know. At least look around for the baby. But, you got the sword there. The dog acted up, apparently. Poor Guinefort, though. Good dog, Guinefort, and Gellert. And all you medieval dogs who are saving babies from snakes and getting nothing but grief for it. We're going to take a very quick break, and then we'll be back. We've got lots of great questions coming up for Jimmy Akin. It is weird questions for Jimmy Akin, and they all get sent in. So we got a whole hour more of Jimmy or weird questions for Jimmy to answer. If you like weird questions with Jimmy Akin, you will love Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. If you haven't checked it out, check it out at mysterious.fm or just type into your machine Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. I want to invite you again to please join us for the Catholic Answers Conference. Check it out at catholicanswersconference.com. How'd you like to go to a conference where Dr. Scott and Kimberly Hahn will be speakers, Dr. Ray Garendi will be a speaker, and Jimmy Akin will be a speaker? I mean, right there. I'd go to that conference, but there's more. Father Sebastian Walsh will be there.
You have to go to the conference. You're emceeing it.
I know. It's a combination of have to and
Oh,
get
I
to.
get it. I see. You were saying, well, you would even if you didn't have to.
That is exactly what I was saying.
Okay.
I need a few minutes to pull myself together after that Guinefort story. So I'm really glad that a break has come up. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin. Oh, I'm told use the promo code EARLY and you get $50 off your conference ticket. I guess I should have said that. Use the promo code EARLY.
EARLY is the promo code. Don't just use it now.
Yeah, that's right. Don't be early in using the promo code. Use the actual word EARLY, and you will save at CatholicAnswersConference.com. Right back with more Jimmy Akin and hopefully no more stories about dogs getting stabbed. Right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I was so mesmerized by the music, I forgot that I'm supposed to talk. I love that music. It's weird questions.
Use your words, Psycho.
I know. Darren's looking at me like, you have a job. Oh, sorry. I woke up. Jimmy Akin, our guest, which is a good thing because it's weird questions with Jimmy Akin this hour as it was last. Welcome back, Jimmy Akin.
Thank you. Very glad to be back.
And lots of weirdness yet to come. And I notice we're starting out with a Hitler question. We didn't. Okay. Not good timing to start the hour with a Hitler question, but here we go. Presupposition. This is from April. April, thank you for the question. Presupposition: Hitler is currently in hell. Assuming that
we're assuming that.
Yep, okay. Assuming that's true, if someone went back in time and killed Hitler before he attained the age of reason, would he go to heaven? Or if someone traveled back in time and prevented someone else from committing mortal sin, that in the original timeline condemned the person to hell? Did I get that? I read that wrong.
Yeah. No, you read it right. Okay. So what April's asking is, what if you did this? Assuming Hitler's in hell, what would happen to his soul, if you went back and changed history so that he died before he hit the age of reason and was responsible for mortal sin? And it's essentially the same question as what if someone has committed mortal sin that sends them to hell, and you go back and stop them from committing that mortal sin. It's getting at the same principle, whether it's Hitler or someone else. You're changing history so that someone never commits a mortal sin that would send them to hell, even though they otherwise went to hell, and in the original timeline. So the ability to change timelines is something that scientists have thought about a lot, and basically there are two plausible scientific options. Now, you see a lot of sloppy science fiction, or at least sloppy may not be the right word, but you see a lot of science fiction that that involves changing time that doesn't really correspond to how it would likely work in the real world if it's possible. The two basic options that scientists have discerned are either there is some kind of chronology protection principle that would prevent you from changing history, or if you can change history, what you're really doing is causing timelines to branch, like in the movies Back to the Future. But unlike Back to the Future, the original timeline doesn't cease to exist. You're just causing it to branch in a new way. So like if in one timeline you came to an intersection and turned left, and you change history so that when you approach that intersection now, you turn right instead of turning left, the original turn left timeline still exists. It's just now you're in a different timeline. You're in one now where you turned right instead of turned left. But the old timeline is still out there. It doesn't cease to exist. And those are really the only two plausible ways that time travel could relate to history, at least based on what we've presently discerned. So we've already eliminated the you can't change history option because April said, assuming someone went back in time and killed Hitler before the age of reason. So that would involve a change in history. And that would mean we're in the other possibility, which is that what you're really doing when you change history is you're creating a new timeline. Well, okay, in this new timeline, Hitler's soul would go to heaven because he was baptized as a baby, and you killed him before the age of reason, so he couldn't have committed a mortal sin yet. So if you kill him in that period, he'll definitely go to heaven. But that doesn't mean the other timeline isn't still there. There is that timeline where he grew up and became a monster and was responsible for the deaths of millions of people that April presupposed had sent him to hell. So what we could conclude from this is, if it's possible to change timelines, and we don't know that, but if it's possible to change timelines, then our souls, like the timelines themselves, will branch. And so if there's a timeline where you became a monster and killed 6 million people and that sends you to hell, then there's a timeline where you're in hell. And if there's a timeline where you died before you hit the age of reason and thus never committed a mortal sin, well, you're in heaven in that timeline. And so our souls would be branching, kind of like coral. The coral plant, how it branches. And so that's what would happen with Hitler. But what would happen with you if you're the person who went back and killed an innocent child? Well, in that case, you've just killed an innocent person, and that's a mortal sin. And so by creating a new timeline where Hitler goes to heaven in this timeline, you may have doomed yourself to hell by using immoral means to create this timeline, and unless, of course, you repent. Recently, I watched all 4 seasons of a show called 12 Monkeys. It's based on the movie 12 Monkeys, and the show involves, it's like the 2040s, and civilization was destroyed in the 20-teens by a plague that wiped out almost everybody. And so the people in the 2040s are trying to fix their history by stopping that plague. And it becomes a much bigger plot. There's all kinds of other stuff. Once they start making progress on the plague, they realize they're part of a much bigger plot. And in 12 Monkeys, it's interesting. They wrestle with, themes like moral responsibility and stuff. And one of the things characters do is they, in order to try to change history into a more preferable form, they kill people, very casually sometimes. And part of the rationale is, well, yeah, but once we reset history, everyone's going to be alive again and have a much better life. And they don't take seriously the timelines issue. Because really, if you're really changing history, and if what you're really doing is causing branching timelines, you're just killing people indiscriminately, and those timelines still exist where you killed this person. And even if you ultimately get to a timeline where that person lives, that doesn't mean you've wiped out the timeline where you killed them. And so there are some unexplored moral consequences. And I was thinking about, maybe I ought to write a novel where you have these gung-ho time travelers wanting to fix history and doing immoral things on the grounds it'll all be okay once we get the right timeline established. And then they realize, oh no, we just created a whole bunch of timelines where things are much, much worse.
Yeah. All of which would be avoided if they just followed the 10 Commandments.
Well, it certainly would help. Although following the 10 Commandments may not stop a worldwide plague.
No, that's true. Oh, yeah, that's right. Not all of that would be avoided. All right, 12 Monkeys.
I will say it's interesting watching a series based on a worldwide plague and how it mutates over time after COVID.
I know that whole thing has changed for us. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for the wait. Who was that? That was April.
It was April.
April. Thank you, April, for the question. I better take a quick break. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features daily Mass, prayers, articles, and meditations in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church. On the web at magnificat.com.
EWTN has its own official YouTube channel with tens of thousands of videos covering just about every conceivable topic of interest to Catholics. And, best of all, it's free. Every day, EWTN adds new TV shows, live events, devotionals, homilies, and specials to its YouTube channel. Visit the EWTN YouTube channel today. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour. This one comes from Patrick. Patrick writes, the sacred scriptures and sacred tradition are silent on the identity of Thomas's twin. Do we have any early dated information about him? Do we have any accounts from legendary sources about him? Further along, do we have any writings from saints about him? I read that there's a Gnostic source identifying Jesus as Thomas's twin.
Okay, so what Patrick's referring to is the Apostle Thomas from the Gospels, and we're told in John that he was not only called Thomas, but he was also called Didymus. Didymus is a Greek word that means twin, and actually Thomas is a Hellenized version of an Aramaic word that means twin. In Aramaic, Toma means twin, but since Toma would be feminine in Greek because it's got that A ending, they stick an S on it. So it's not feminine, and that's how we get Thomas. So since this individual, one of the 12, was called twin, that suggests he was a twin. Now, some people have tried to find a sort of a symbolic meaning to that name, but probably he had a biological twin, either fraternal or identical. We don't really, and Patrick is correct, we don't really know a lot about who the twin would have been. One thing that we have just a hint of evidence for is what Thomas's birth name might have been. It might have been Judas. There is some manuscript evidence that would suggest that Thomas's birth name might have been Judas, and then they called him twin to distinguish him from other Judases, like Judas Iscariot or Saint Jude, the good one. And so there's a possibility he might have been named Judas, but that's very uncertain. When it comes to who his twin would have been, we know almost nothing. But we do know something. His twin probably was not a member of the Christian community during the ministry of Jesus. Because if he was, then we probably would have heard more about him. Just like, we hear about James and John and the fact they're brothers, and Peter and Andrew and the fact that they're brothers. If Thomas's twin was a member of the Christian community, especially, then he would have been known to the audiences of the original Gospels, and we probably would have heard about him. At least there's a good chance we would have heard about him. We would have heard about, Aristion and Judas and their twins, but we don't. We only hear about one of the twins. So the other twin probably was not a Christian, at least during, and certainly not a member of the core Christian community, at least during the ministry of Jesus. So what about later sources? Well, we have a document known as the Acts of Thomas, and it's kind of like the book of Acts. It tells the story of what Thomas did after the ministry of Jesus. The book of Acts does that for Peter and Paul. And so there were other books of Acts that were written in the early church, and there is one that focuses on Thomas and talks about him going to India and things like that. The Acts of Thomas was written sometime between the 2nd and the 4th centuries, so between the 100s and the 300s. Just call it, let's say, the 200s, since we're not sure. And it says that Thomas was the spiritual twin of Jesus, not the biological twin of Jesus, but spiritually he was similar to Jesus. Or, according to some accounts I've read, and I haven't looked this up in the Acts of Thomas itself, it may indicate that he had a similar physical appearance to Jesus, even though they weren't biologically related. So he's either physically similar in appearance or he was spiritually similar to Jesus, and on that basis he got called the twin, meaning the twin of Jesus. I think this is unlikely. I think it is much more likely that he had an actual physical twin. There is also another book called Thomas the Contender, which was written in the early 3rd century, so this is the early 200s, and it says that Thomas was a biological twin of Jesus. So he's Jesus's twin. And this is just not credible at all. Nobody buys this. Our earliest sources do not indicate that Jesus had a twin, and having a twin is something that is remarkable and that would get mentioned. You know, when they have twins in the Old Testament, like Jacob and Esau, it gets mentioned. And we do have accounts of Jesus's birth, and they only talk about Jesus being born by Mary. None of them talk about, oh, and then this other guy came out of her womb too. So this is late speculation, and the Gospel of Thomas the Contender is actually a Gnostic work. Acts of Thomas is not necessarily Gnostic, although it has some Gnostic tendencies. But Thomas the Contender is a Gnostic work, and it does, as Patrick said, identify Jesus as Thomas's twin. But historically, that's very implausible, and no scholar takes that seriously.
Okay, thank you for the question, Patrick. Appreciate that. This one comes from Terry, and Terry asks this, Jimmy. Assume that the evidence that consciousness is non-local is correct. That is, that the mind exists separate and outside the body, and thus our brains are simply complex, bespoke antennas capturing the frequency of our knowledge and personality, like tuning an antenna to a radio frequency. Would this explain stories of telepathy? Mind reader is picking up another station. Reincarnation, antenna is accidentally so close to the frequency that it picks up the signal and its embedded information. Or even something as mundane as while a blow to the head changes the receiver enough that it picks up another station. Brain trauma causes personality changes.
Okay, so the assumption that that consciousness is non-local is actually supported in the history of Catholic thought by individuals like St. Thomas Aquinas. We mentioned earlier that that Aquinas, says the soul doesn't really, and this is Aquinas' opinion, there is another opinion, but Aquinas says the soul doesn't have a location. And just like angels, since they don't have bodies, they don't have locations. Instead, you can say that an angel or a soul is present wherever it's manifesting. And that's a non-local description of consciousness. So our minds, our souls, our consciousnesses don't really have a location, but we can speak of them as if they're in our bodies because they manifest through our bodies and our brains. And there's additional evidence that from parapsychology that there are non-local aspects to consciousness. So that all checks out, and Terry is assuming all that's true. What he then goes on to ask is, should we understand, or he kind of assumes that we should understand our brains as sort of like antennas capturing a frequency from consciousness, and that this might explain other phenomena. Well, the basic answer is that yes, this model may explain various phenomena like telepathy or past life memories or things like that, personality changes. But we want to be a little bit careful because we're assuming a sender-receiver model that is based on radio. And this model goes back to the early 20th century when Marconi, came up with radio, and it was a big new thing. And whenever a big new idea comes around, people try to use it as a model for other things that they're still figuring out. And so in the early 20th century, it was thought that okay, we understand how radio works, and it involves the transmission of information over a distance without a physical medium in between. And telepathy seems to involve the transmission of information over a distance without requiring a physical medium, like a telegraph wire. And so let's use radio as a model for how telepathy works. And there was even a book published by Upton Sinclair, a famous American writer, called Mental Radio. Albert Einstein was very interested in telepathy, and he actually wrote a foreword for one of the editions of Mental Radio. But over the course of the 20th century, we found that telepathy has some differences, at least in the observable effects in parapsychological studies of telepathy. It had some differences from radio. One of the things that radio is dependent on is a signal to transmit the information. You broadcast radio waves, and signals tend to degrade over time based on how they expand and fill space. They get weaker. So you have a certain amount of energy in the signal at the broadcast tower, but then as that signal ripples out spherically from the broadcast tower, it gets weaker and weaker as it goes. It also gets blocked by things like the curvature of the Earth. So that's one reason why you can't hear radio stations on the other side of the planet just by radio waves. And so parapsychologists found telepathy doesn't seem to be subject to those limitations. It doesn't seem to matter how far away the people are, and it doesn't matter if the bulk of the Earth is between them. It seems to work anyway, to the extent that it seems to work. And so it doesn't look like telepathy or other parapsychological phenomena have the same kind of limitations that radio waves do. And so that's led to a questioning of is this radio-like model with antennas and receivers and stuff, is that accurate? There have been a lot of people in the parapsychological community who've said we really shouldn't think in terms of this radio sender-receiver model. Consciousness is even more non-local than that. But our brains may function not as antennas exactly, but as transducers. Now, what a transducer is it's a device, a thing, that translates one kind of thing into another kind of thing. And antennas are an example of that. Antennas are transducers. They take radio waves from the air and convert them into electrical signals that go down a wire. We also have all of our senses are transducers. Our eyes translate light waves that come into the eye into electrochemical signals that travel through our nervous system. Similarly, all of our other senses, like our hearing, translates sound waves in the atmosphere into electrochemical signals that get taken to our brain. So we've got transducers all over the place, just in our own bodies. And the proposal is not so much that the brain is an antenna as a transducer that converts consciousness into physical action in the body. And it's possible if you mess with a transducer, you're going to mess up its function. If you have a radio and you start monkeying with the settings enough, you can impede the radio from functioning correctly. Or a television. Television is another kind of involves transducers. You can mess up the video signal. And so it's possible, if the brain transduces things, that it transduces consciousness, that you could have personality changes, like the famous case of Phineas Gage, I think his name was, who got a train spike through his head and his whole personality changed. He became a nasty person. Well, you messed with his transducer, if this theory is correct. And it's possible that this non-locality of consciousness and the transduction function of the brain could be responsible for things like telepathy, or cases of the reincarnation type where someone thinks they remember being another person, but really what they're doing is picking up information from somebody else's life. I actually talked about that in episodes 275 and 276 of Mysterious World. So you go to mysterious.fm/275 and especially mysterious.fm/276 for an exploration of how this psychic link theory of reincarnation memories might work. It would explain them without actual reincarnation. So anyway, those are some thoughts on that subject. And what Terry's asking about is fundamentally in the ballpark. And it is possible to explain a lot of these phenomena along these lines. We just want to be careful about too quickly adopting the signal receiver radio model.
Yeah. As you were talking, I realized it's just the mind. When you talk about non-local, that's literally, you can't imagine non-local.
It's hard to imagine non-local. Radio waves actually are a local phenomenon.
Right. Well, hey, thanks, Terry, for the question. That's why we love Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, an opportunity to get into things that we don't normally get into. And one of the things we do normally get into is Jesus, and we've got a whole conference on Jesus coming up, on the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. It's called Learn From Me.
And we do really get into Jesus. I mean, Jesus is just all right with me.
And me as well, Jimmy. And I wish I knew the name of the band. I would say that, but now I don't remember.
The Doobie Brothers.
Oh, that was the Doobie Brothers, yes. And with the Doobie Brothers as well. You can find out all about our conference at CatholicAnswersConference.com. If you use the word EARLY as your promo code, EARLY, you get $50 off your conference ticket when you sign up at CatholicAnswersConference.com. More weird questions for Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to get right to the core of Christ's saving message? Want a roadmap for living the life Christ calls you to? It's time to look again at the Beatitudes. In his new book, Heart of the Gospel, How the Beatitudes Show Us God's Plan for Happiness, Father Sebastian Walsh demonstrates compellingly how these 8 declarations make up the foundation, the essence, and the final goal of Jesus' teaching. Heart of the Gospel illuminates the scriptural passages from which we get the Beatitudes, explains the significance of their wording, their order, and their timing in Jesus' ministry. And it draws out edifying parallels and connections with salvation history and the lives of the saints. Most importantly, Father Walsh offers wise counsel from his own work as a priest and teacher to help you live the Beatitudes in your own life. Order your copy of Heart of the Gospel today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, where this whole hour, as a matter of fact, both hours today, devoted to weird questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin, of course, our guest, and more weirdness to come. And I have to say, people have done a good job. I've enjoyed the weird questions today. Jeanette asks this, Jimmy. Say I die and go to hell.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were going to say.
No, I think she has more than that. I'm just acknowledging the starting premise.
All right. Say I die and go to hell because I decided to intentionally miss Mass to stay home, day drink, and play Animal Crossing. Will I know what my Sulphur Lake neighbor is there for? Like, will I look across the bubbling fire pit and see, for example, a Catholic politician who publicly supported abortion? Will I be able to be like, yeah, glad they're facing justice for their part in such evil as I burn alongside them? Or will I be so deep in my own self-misery, I won't care?
Well, the fundamental answer is we don't know. We can speculate in situations like this, but God hasn't told us the answer to these questions.
Okay.
We do have some evidence from Scripture that the judgment will be public. The final judgment will be public because Jesus talks about whatever you whisper in the darkness is going to be shouted from the rooftops. And that would suggest that we will have at least some knowledge of what other people have done, whether they're damned or saved, we'll have that awareness. And so it's quite possible that we will be aware, if we are damned, of what other damned people have done. The second question, will we be able to react to that in a way that goes beyond just caring about ourselves? So we're not just, she asks, will I be so deep in my own misery I won't care? Or will I be able to say, oh, good, I'm glad that person who did something horrible is getting their comeuppance? Well, we also have a little bit of evidence in this regard in the form of the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, where the rich man is not totally self-absorbed. Once he realizes the situation he's in, he still has he doesn't have a supernatural love of God, but he's got enough natural affection for his brothers. He wants to try to save them from this fate. And so he proposes to Abraham that Lazarus be sent back from the dead to warn his brothers. And Abraham says, well, they've got Moses and the prophets, let him listen to them. So his request isn't granted, but at least the way he's depicted in this parable, the rich man is not totally self-absorbed. He does want good for his relatives. And so that would suggest that even the damned, aren't totally self-absorbed and don't care about anything other than themselves. So if Jeanette were in hell, suffering for her horrendous sin of playing Animal Crossing, I understand that's not what she's actually proposing, but she does mention it. She could look over and see an abortionist in hell and say, oh, I'm glad that baby killer is getting his just desserts. That would be possible, at least given the non-self-absorption that we see in the rich man in the parable. Mm-hmm. But it's only a parable, so we can't rely on it as if it's a literal account. So I have to kind of put an asterisk there and say there's some evidence suggesting that we won't be totally self-absorbed, but don't know it for sure. Then there's a further question, because if Jeanette is able to look at, it has the awareness and non-self-absorption to look at someone else and say, oh, they're getting what they deserve, she might have that for herself too. And she might be able to look at herself in the afterlife and say, you know what I'm getting is just. I deserve this. It's not fun, but I chose to turn my back on God in a deliberate way, and I chose to be without him, and I understand why this is happening, and I accept it. This is the right thing to happen, even though it's not fun. Kind of like some people, you might be playing, Mumbly Peg, which is a knife game, and you might accidentally stab yourself with the knife and then have to go get stitched up, and that's not fun, but you're saying, yeah, I need to get stitched up. This is the right thing to happen. I was foolishly playing with a knife, mm-hmm. and I stabbed myself, and this is the natural consequence of this. I don't enjoy it, but it's the right thing to do now. And a damned person might have that level of self-awareness as well.
Jeanette, thank you for the question. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin, and this one comes from Terry, and it involves things that I have no idea what Terry is talking about. So here we go.
I'll explain them.
Do DMT Machine Elves have existence outside the consciousness of the person encountering them? And if so, and because of their complex semi-human, inhuman appearances, is there any chance that they could have been the angels encountered in scriptural times?
Okay, so we need to start by talking about what DMT Machine Elves are. The term, and I'm blanking on the name of the guy who coined it now, Terence McKenna, if I recall correctly. So Terence McKenna was a psychonaut, meaning he was an individual who used psychedelic drugs to explore mental realms. And one of the things that he and others have reported when taking certain psychoactive drugs like DMT, which is a hallucinogen, is encountering entities that they meet and that they communicate with in this psychologically psychedelic state. And McKenna described these as kind of small beings and looked kind of like Christmas tree ornaments sometimes, and they were very active, and they were communicating with him and relating to him, and they were kind of surprised to see him, but oh, hey, now that you're here, this is great. And they were kind of robotic or mechanical at the same time. They seemed that way. And so he called them, since he had them under the influence of DMT, he called them DMT Machine Elves. But other people have just called them, like DMT Entities and things like that, because other people have reported them too. Well, I've done some study in this area. I have not taken psychoactive drugs, but I have done some reading in this area, and I plan to do more reading in this area, and I ultimately plan to talk about these entities on Mysterious World. At my present state of research, I am unaware of any evidence that would establish the DMT elves or DMT entities as having an independent existence. For all I know, they're just like the people you meet in your dreams. When you meet someone in a dream, doesn't mean that they're a real person. They could just be, they likely are, if you've never seen them before, they likely are just a construct of your subconscious, dreaming module. And even if there's someone it's not the real person. If I see my sister in a dream, it's not really my sister, at least most of the time. It's not really going to be my sister. It's a simulation of my sister that my subconscious dream module has come up with. And in the same way, if you have someone take a drug and they effectively start dreaming, well, then I would assume that unless we have some other kind of evidence that any entities they report encountering are manufactured by their subconscious. So how could we get information or evidence that would support them as having an independent existence? Well, I can imagine a few ways of doing that. One way of doing it would be to obtain veridical knowledge from these entities. In other words, you could get information from them that you don't know and that goes beyond random chance. So it needs to be really specific information, not the sun is going to come up tomorrow. But you could get specific information that goes beyond random chance that you don't know when you go into the drug state, and then you verify that information after you're in the drug state. So if you could get veridical information that's true, that goes beyond random chance, that you didn't previously know, then that could provide evidence that you're actually dealing with another mind. Another way is if you were able to have these entities perform an effect in the world that's observable objectively. Like you go into the drug state and you say, hey, my buddy's back at the lab. They really want to know if you're real or not. Could you psychokinetically knock over a book that we set up on a lab table? And if the book gets knocked over, well, that could be evidence suggesting that some entity that you encountered knocked the book over since you made that request. So those would be possible ways to gain evidence that DMT entities are more than just subconscious constructs, but it wouldn't prove it. And this is a classic issue in parapsychology. Just because an effect happens, that doesn't mean you know who did it. If psychic functioning is real, so like if, and this is, I'm not saying it is, but if ESP is real, where people can pick up information psychically, or if psychokinesis is real, where people can influence matter mentally, how do you know it wasn't you that produced the effects? Maybe when you asked for the veridical information, your own ESP got it, and you just processed it in the dream as being told to you by the machine elves. Or if the book got knocked over, maybe you knocked it over with your own psychokinesis, but you processed that as, oh, the machine elves knocked it over. So even having this kind of evidence wouldn't prove it. that they have an independent reality. So this is a very tricky issue, and I don't know that there's an ultimate way to solve it. It's really a subcase of what in philosophy is known as the problem of other minds. Having said that, the other aspect of Terry's question is, could these complex semi-human, inhuman appearance beings have been the angels that were encountered in scriptural times? And there are angelic beings that look really weird, like the cherubim and the seraphim that are composite animals. The seraphim are more snake-like, but they've got 6 wings. The cherubim are a composite of different types of animals and have 4 wings. And then there are these others that are kind of like wheels covered in eyes. And the cherubim and seraphim also tend to be covered in eyes. So they do look really weird. Hypothetically, could drugs like DMT be allowing you to have a perception of the realm where angels are hanging out? Hypothetically, maybe. I can't rule that out. I would worry about, even if you have a perception of this angelic realm, you may be getting distorted perceptions of it. You may not be perceiving it accurately, but you might be having some kind of a perception of it. And you might be having a perception of angels, but they might be the bad ones. So there are significant risks here. On the other hand, as I said, the DMT Machine Elves, they may just be subconscious products of our subconscious that are basically hallucinations.
Terry, thank you for the question. A whole area of knowledge I didn't even know existed, DMT Machine Elves. So now I know. More weird questions coming up right after this for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Coverage as seen through a Catholic lens.
All people of faith and sincerity need to awaken to this and protect this fundamental right of religious liberty.
Expert analysis.
Does revelation judge history, or does history judge revelation?
Stories vital to people of faith.
It's part of our faith that comedy and tragedy naturally go hand in hand.
Delivered to your inbox every week. Sign up today. Go to EWTN.com/worldover.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's Weird Question Day. We got lots of weird questions for Jimmy Akin. This one comes from Karen. Jimmy, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons?
Well, okay, so we're going to assume that Adam and Eve are literal historical individuals for purposes of answering this question, and in order to answer it, we need to figure out 2 things about Adam and Eve and belly buttons. The first thing we need to figure out is, how do belly buttons form? What is responsible for them? And now, as a lot of people will know, a belly button is formed at the point on your body where the umbilical cord was attached when you were still in your mother's womb. But why does it form? For the longest time, I assumed that it was genetic, that there's something in our genes that when the umbilical cord falls off, it creates a belly button there, and it's not just like a scar left from it's not just the result of healing when the umbilical cord falls off. But I always try to check myself out, and so I checked myself out some time ago and discovered, oh, no, it apparently is just a healed wound. There's not a genetic thing that forces belly buttons to occur in that way. It appears to just be a wound from where the umbilical cord fell off. So the second thing we would need to figure out about Adam and Eve in particular is, how did they come into the world? Were they born? Were they ever in the womb? Did they ever have umbilical cords? Well, the way the text presents their creation in Genesis 2, Adam is basically a Hebrew version of Galatea. Galatea was a statue, also Pygmalion, but Galatea was a statue in Greek folklore that the gods created and then gave life to. And that's basically what Adam is. God makes his body as a statue, and then he breathes the spirit of life into his nostrils, and Adam becomes a living soul. And so he wasn't in a womb here. Also, when it comes to Eve, God puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes out one of his ribs, and then fashions it into a woman. And there's no mention of her being in a womb. So if this account is meant literally, then Adam and Eve would not necessarily have belly buttons. I mean, they might have them if God chose to build them with belly buttons. God could have put a belly button on the statue, and he could have put a belly button on Eve. But if they never were in wombs and never had umbilical cords, then they wouldn't need to have belly buttons. On the other hand, it is generally conceded by many Catholic thinkers today, and the magisterium has indicated it has no problem with this, that going back to Humanae Vitae in 1950 under Pius XII, that these narratives may not be literal, and they may be read in a way that is consistent with the idea of the first humans acquiring their bodies from pre-humans, living pre-humans who were like almost people, but not almost modern humans, but not quite. And in that case, Adam and Eve would have been born in the wombs of their immediate predecessors, who would have been almost human, but not almost modern humans, but not quite. And they therefore would have had umbilical cords, and they therefore would have belly buttons. And so the answer to whether they have belly buttons is going to depend on which theory you endorse regarding the origin of Adam and Eve. Should the Genesis 2 text be read strictly literally, or should it be read in a non-literal way that represents the creation of the first humans from prior biological forms that God used as part of his plan, in which case they would have belly buttons, definitely.
Karen, thank you for the question. I'm going to keep moving, see how many of these I can get in. And this one comes from Deacon Brian. Why did UFO appearances look more like flying saucers back in the 40s and 50s? And did the technology become more advanced with sightings of Tic Tacs and more elaborate craft?
Okay, to the extent that UFOs are not real, a lot of people see stuff that they interpret as, oh, that's a UFO, and really it's not. It may be an unidentified object to them, but it may turn out it's a perfectly conventional object. Like, for example, in the 1960s, there were lots of sightings of glowing discs in the twilight sky. And it turns out what a lot of those were secret spy planes that were meant to fly so fast they didn't even have paint on them in order to keep them light. And so what people were seeing, since it's twilight and they're seeing this glowing disc looking thing up there, they're seeing the central body of the vehicle, of the spy plane, that's made out of titanium and is not painted. And so even though it's getting dark here on Earth, the sun is still peeking over the horizon from the altitude that the spy plane is at. Yeah. And so the sun is still shining up at that altitude, and it's hitting the titanium surface and making it look like it glows. But down at the elevation of ground level, the sun's already set, and so it's getting dark, but you see this glowing circular thing in the sky. because at that altitude, you're not seeing all the details of how the plane is shaped. You're seeing the central mass of the plane. And if you've heard the term flying saucer and your brain can interpret that as a circle, then that's how your brain's going to interpret it. So the popularization of the term flying saucer may have itself influenced how people perceived things. So they would tend to perceive them as if they're circular when they may not strictly be circular. And if that applies to spy planes like the SR-71 Blackbird and the Oxcart, which was the more classified CIA version, then it'll apply to real UFOs too, if any of them are alien craft. If you've been told, flying saucers are appearing in our sky, then you're going to see things in terms of flying saucers, unless they're very different from flying saucers. Now, in terms of the origin of the phrase flying saucer, it was popularized in 1947 after a sighting up in Washington State by a man named Kenneth Arnold, who was himself a pilot. He was flying along in his plane, and he saw some objects that were kind of flying in a convoy, and they were bouncing up and down as they flew. And he compared their motion to like what you would see if you skipped a rock or a saucer across the surface of water. It'd bounce up and down. And then when he told the press about that, now he didn't say they were shaped like saucers. He said their motion was like saucers. He said they actually kind of looked like shovel heads or boomerangs, or they weren't circular. But when he talked to the press said, they move like saucers skipping on water. They're flying saucers. And then people started to perceive round things in the sky. Well, if you think about a shovel head, which is kind of how Kenneth Arnold described these, shovel heads are kind of almost circular,
Yeah.
And so if you're told it's a flying saucer, you could perceive something as a saucer, even though it's not actually a saucer if you looked at it up close. People also reported a lot of other shapes of over the 1940s and 50s of UFOs, including spheres, the objects that look like balls, cigars, long tubular ones, cigar-shaped UFOs were very common, saucers, of course, and things like boomerangs. So there were a lot of shapes there. And to address Deacon Brian's question, well, it's possible that the UFOs could have, if they're extraterrestrial or interdimensional or anything else exotic, it's possible that they could have had technological upgrades. It's also possible their shapes could have changed over time because new ships have arrived, like maybe we saw the scout ships in the 1940s, and now other kinds of ships have arrived. And it's possible their shapes changed because they're shape changing. Today, we have what are known as variable geometry aircraft or shape-shifting aircraft. Every plane, every jetliner is like this to a degree. If you'll notice, when you see a jetliner taken off, well, it's rolling down the runway on these wheels that are on supports. And then it gets off the ground and up go the wheels, and these flaps cover over where they were when the landing gear retracts. And then when they come back down, the flaps go out and here come the wheels, and then it lands again. So that of itself is a form of variable geometry craft. But we have even more variable geometry in our aircraft today than that, because there are some planes, they're sometimes known as well, I won't have time to describe them, but they'll stick their wings out straight and then bend them back to go faster.
Yeah.
Well, it may be that even more advanced tech is going to be more variable in its geometry than what we have, in which case maybe what we're seeing is the same kind of crafts, they're just changing shapes.
Deacon Brian, thanks for ending us on a UFO question. Perfect place to end. Jimmy Akin, thank you for 2 great hours of weird questions.
My pleasure.
If you like this, check out Mysterious World, mysterious.fm, or just put in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. That will do it for us. I'll invite you again. Come on to the conference. Check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com and use that promo code. Use the word early as your promo code and save $50 off your conference ticket. CatholicAnswersConference.com. See you next time. God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.